Hey, everybody, welcome to World History. We're starting chapter 17, aka the Enlightenment, today. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. Here's what we're doing in class today. Again, there's a bell ringer, we've got notes and a quiz, there'll be a video, web quest. If you're in the honors course, you do have a thinkers project to keep working on. Our objectives are going to identify various philosophers from the Enlightenment, as well as analyze different thinkers' thoughts on humanity. Those are our goals for today. So, if you remember 3 chapters ago, when we did chapter 13, we talked about the scientific revolution. This convinced educated Europeans of the power of human reason. This is mainly the idea of natural law, rules discoverable by reason. Again, things like gravity and magnetism. You know, if I throw this marker up in the air, it comes back down. Gravity. By using science, reformers are going to set out to study human behavior and solve the problems of society. Immanuel Kant is going to be the first to call this era the Enlightenment. We're mainly in the 1700s at this point. So, one of the main thinkers we need to talk about is Thomas Hobbes. He wrote a book called Leviathan, and he argued that people were naturally cruel and greedy and selfish, basically saying they're all bad people. He stated that people also entered into a social contract, an agreement in which people give up their freedom to an organized society in exchange for protection. And he believed that only a powerful government could ensure an orderly society. On the other hand, we have John Locke. He was a lot more optimistic about human nature. He claimed that people had natural rights, and that these are rights that belong to all humans at birth, things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Those are all things that we have the moment we're born. Those are our natural rights. He also wrote a book, The Two Treaties of Government, that argued that people formed governments to protect their natural rights, and that if a government failed to meet that obligation, the people had the right to overthrow the government. Locke's ideas are heavily going to inspire the American Revolution. We'll talk about that in a couple class periods, actually. So, moving on from our British thinkers for a moment, we're moving over to France. The Enlightenment was big in France at this point. The philosophes were French thinkers who embraced the Enlightenment. Again, this legitimately translates to philosophers. Some famous ones include the Baron de Montesquieu, Voltaire, Denis Diderot, and Jean Jacques Rousseau, who we're all going to talk about today. So, starting with the Baron, he's one of the earliest figures in the Enlightenment, kind of like the go-to guy. Like he's like the original sensation. He studied the governments of Europe from Italy to England from basically the beginning of human history to that point. He discussed governments throughout history in his book, The Spirit of Laws, and felt the best way to protect liberty was to divide various functions and powers in government among 3 branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, which we have here today in the United States. And he believed that each branch should be able to serve as a check on the other two. You know, that whole idea of checks and balances. This is where it's coming from. Voltaire is probably the most famous one. He's like the guy when you think of the Enlightenment. He went on to say, "My trade is to say what I think." He had no filter. He used sarcasm to expose government abuses and corruption. He wasn't afraid to call people out on their baloney. He targeted corrupt officials and idle aristocrats who weren't doing anything to help society. He battled injustice, inequality, and superstitions. Voltaire also detested the slave trade and religious prejudice that were extremely high in Europe at this point. Voltaire's writings often offended both the French government and the Catholic Church to the point that he's going to be imprisoned and then exiled from France, and his books are going to then be outlawed and burned. Like, they did not like Voltaire. Diderot, he wrote the 28-volume encyclopedia that we still use today. His purpose was to change the general way of thinking, and by explaining topics like government, philosophy, and religion, he will then be able to educate the masses. He included articles by leading thinkers like Montesquieu and Voltaire in his encyclopedias. Articles by the philosophers denounced things like slavery, praised the freedom of expression, and urged education for all. They also attacked divine right theory and traditional religions. Again, divine right theory is the belief that a ruler has been placed on the throne by God. The French government then argued that it was an attack on public morals, and the Pope threatened to excommunicate any Roman Catholics who either bought or read the book, which seems to be kind of hard to prove. Can you prove someone read a book? Rousseau, kind of like Hobbes, believed people in their natural state, not Hobbes, Locke believed people in their natural state were basically good. He felt this good was corrupted by the evils of society, especially the unequal distribution of property. He wrote the book The Social Contract, so this is separate from the idea of social contract. So we have The Social Contract, the book by Rousseau, that felt that society placed too many limitations on people's behavior and believed that any controls should be minimal and that only freely elected governments should impose their controls. Basically, he's put his faith in the general will of the people. This is going to influence political and social thinkers for more than 200 years. Now, men aren't the only ones that like the ideas of the Enlightenment. Women are also getting involved as well. The philosophers didn't apply their thoughts of freedom and equality to women. So women like Mary Wollstonecraft are going to write a vindication of the rights of women and call for the basic things of equal education for boys and girls. The idea of women's equality, though, at this point in history is heavily ridiculed and sharply condemned. We also have new ideas in terms of economics. French philosophers known as physiocrats focused on economic reforms. Just like the philosophers, they also base their thinking on natural laws. They're also going to reject that idea of mercantilism that we introduced last chapter. Basically, instead, they urge for a policy of laissez faire, basically allowing businesses to operate with little or no government influence. They also are going to support the idea of free trade and oppose tariffs, so taxes. Scottish economist Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. We'll talk more about him again in a couple chapters, but do remember that he argued that the free market should be allowed to regulate business activity. And it showed how manufacturing, trade, wages, profits, and economic growth were all linked to supply and demand. A great example for this is think back to 2020 and think about toilet paper. The demand for toilet paper was high, but the supply was really low. But there were other products where the demand was really low and the stores had a ton of supply. He also believed that the government had a duty to protect society, administer justice, and provide public works. All of this to say, this is the Enlightenment is where people really start to think more about the world around them. All right, that is it for notes for today. What you're going to go do is the Chapter 17 web quest, which is posted on Google Classroom. And I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.